The sun sat high and cruel over Ashridge when they dragged Leora Ashwin to the edge of the pit. Heat shimmered off the stone walls. Dust clung to the sweat on her skin. Beneath her bare feet, the sand was stained a permanent rust red. No matter how many times the pack hosed it down, the air reeked of iron and fur and fear. Thick enough to choke on. Around the arena, the pack roared. Men leaned over the railing, shouting for blood. Women fanned themselves with their hats and gossiped about who would die first. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, eyes bright and eager, while voices above them said, "Watch. This is what happens to the weak." Leora kept her wrists lifted, bound in rough rope that had already rubbed the skin raw. Her ankles burned with every step. She swallowed hard and made herself look. I really look. At the others in the sand. 3 Omegas huddled near the center of the pit. All of them were younger than her. One boy who couldn't be more than 16 kept whispering prayers under his breath. A girl with a braid down her back shook so hard her teeth clicked. Useless. They called them. Useless. They called her. Overhead, Alpha Alaric Thorn raised his arms for silence. He smiled down at his people like a generous god. Today, his voice boomed. We purify our pack. We cast out weakness. We remind the world that Ashridge bows to no one. Leora had stood in front of this crowd before. 3 times she had walked the mating circle. 3 times potential mates had brushed her wrist, inhaled her scent, and stepped back with disgust curling their lips. Broken. They'd murmured. Wrong. Not worth claiming. If there was something rotten in her, fine. Let them throw it into the sand and be done with it. The gate opposite her creaked open. The beta who stepped through was a mountain in human form. All corded muscle and easy violence. The crowd screamed his name. He flexed his hands, claws sliding out. Feeding on the noise, he went for the trembling girl first. Leora didn't think. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She lunged, shoving the girl aside just as the beta's claws sliced across Leora's shoulder. White-hot pain exploded down her arm. The impact knocked her to her knees. The crowd roared its approval. Leora forced herself back to her feet. Blood ran warm down her side, dripping into the sand. She met the beta's eyes, lifted her chin, and spat red onto the ground between them. No crying, no begging. If this was the last thing she did, she would not give them tears. For a heartbeat, the noise faltered. A hush swept the pit. Not out of respect, but out of shock that a nobody Omega would dare. Then, from the high platform above, another voice cut through the silence. Enough. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The word rolled over the arena like distant thunder. Heads turned. The crowd shifted and parted along the balcony as a stranger stepped forward. He wore dark clothes despite the heat, a long coat brushing his boots. A pale scar slashed over one eye, failing to blunt the sharpness of his gaze. Shadows seemed to cling to him as if they knew his name. Cade Nightborn, the Shadow King of the Northern Dominion. His gaze swept the pit once, then found Leora, locked on, held, for the first time that day. Her heart stuttered for a reason that wasn't fear. Something hot and electric snapped between them. A pull under her ribs she didn't have a name for. The crowd muttered. Restless. Suddenly unsure. The king's voice. When he spoke again, it was almost gentle. The girl in the pit. He said softly, I'll take her. For a moment after the Shadow King spoke, no one moved. Leora swayed where she stood in the sand, vision tunneling at the edges. The world had gone oddly quiet, as if the pit itself were holding its breath. Above her, Ulrich found his voice first. Your Majesty, he called, smooth as ever. Our trials are a private pack matter. We don't sell criminals like cattle. Gold clinked. The sound cut through the air, the heavy weight of a pouch landing on stone. Leora blinked up, squinting against the glare. On the viewing platform, a servant knelt beside Cade Nightborn, holding open a chest so full of coin it caught the sun like water. "This," Cade said, as though bored, "is for the disturbance," the crowd murmured, even from the sand. Leora could taste their shock. That chest held more wealth than most wolves in Ashridge would see in 10 lifetimes. Alaric's smile tightened. His fingers flexed on the railing. "And," Cade added, "for your mistake." He didn't raise his voice. Didn't snarl. He simply let the words sink in. A mistake. That was what he called Leora dying in the pit. Alaric chuckled. The sound brittle. A generous gift. "My king. But as I said, one girl hardly. I'm not purchasing one." Cade cut in. "I'll take them all. Every Omega scheduled for execution this season." His gaze brushed over the others in the sand, then settled on Leora again. 7. Isn't it? The silence that followed was thicker than any roar. Omegas on the benches stared, barely daring to breathe. Somewhere, a child began to cry and was quickly shushed. Leora's knees buckled. The world tilted. She barely felt the guards dragging her upright, the ropes biting deeper into her skin. Alaric's jaw worked. He couldn't refuse. Not in front of his pack. Not with that much gold shining in the sun, and a king watching him like a wolf watching a snake. So he spread his arms, that charming smile snapping back into place like a mask. "Ashridge honors the Dominion," he declared. "If our king desires what we deem worthless, who are we to argue?" Laughter rippled through the stands. Forced and uneasy, his eyes found Leora then. And the smile didn't reach them. Fury burned there. Dark and bright. "You'll pay for this," they promised. By the time the guards dragged her out of the pit, her legs barely worked. The world blurred into streaks of stone and shadow. She felt the other Omegas stumbling around her. Heard one of them sobbing quietly. They brought them to the carriage yard. This close. The Shadow King's presence was almost a physical thing. He stood beside a black carriage. Cloak unfastened now. Sleeves rolled to his forearms. Up close, he looked less like a distant legend, and more like a man who'd carved his life out of battles and bargains. Leora's foot caught on a rut. She pitched forward. Ropes biting. Vision filling with dirt. A hand closed around her wrist. It was meant to be a simple catch. A practical gesture to keep her from face-planting in front of half the pack. But the second his skin touched hers, the world exploded. Heat shot from his fingers up her arm, searing straight to her chest. Her heart stuttered, then slammed hard against her ribs. The breath tore out of her lungs on a ragged gasp. A scent hit her wild and sharp, like pine smoke on cold air. Like the moment just before a storm breaks. It wrapped around her, burrowed under her skin. Cade froze. For an instant, his carefully blank face cracked. His pupils blew wide. His wolf rose up so fast his hands shook. Claws threatening to break skin. It's her. The thought was there. Wordless and undeniable. As old as the legends whispered in mountain caves. His mark on his chest burned. An echo of a prophecy he'd spent years trying to outrun. Leora jerked her hand back as if burned. Her pulse was a drum in her ears. She glared at him, chest heaving, mistaking shock for anger. "Don't touch me," she rasped. His jaw tightened. "Then stand," he said quietly. "On your own feet." They loaded the Omegas into wagons. Chains clinked as they were fastened to iron rings. Leora stared at the line of carriages and horses, at the Nightborn banners snapping in the wind. When the caravan rolled forward, she twisted to look back. Ashridge rose behind her. Familiar roofs and smoky chimneys silhouetted against the sky. Training fields. The narrow alley where she'd hidden as a child. The pit, just visible beyond the walls. Waiting for the next spectacle. Home, she thought. And the word felt like ash on her tongue. Rescued. That's what the whispers would say. That the Shadow King had saved the doomed Omegas. But rope still bit into her wrists. Iron still circled her ankles. She wasn't free. She'd simply been sold to a different monster. One with a crown instead of a pretty speech. The road bent. The walls of Ashridge vanished behind a stand of dark trees. That night, the campfires of the Nightborn caravan dotted the hillside like fallen stars. In the largest tent, Cade sat at a rough-hewn table. Maps and reports spread out in front of him. Ignored. His beta, a broad-shouldered male named Yoren, waited until the silence stretched long. What did you smell on her? My king, he asked quietly. Cade's thumb brushed the scar over his eye. He could still feel the echo of that first touch. The way his wolf had thrown itself against his ribs. How the mark on his chest still burned faintly, not weakness. He said at last. Joran frowned. Then what? Cade's gaze drifted to the tent flap, to where he knew the Omegas slept fitfully under guard. Something, he murmured, more to himself than to his beta. I thought only existed in legends. Leora woke to the smell of herbs and smoke instead of dust and blood. For a moment, she didn't move. The last thing she remembered was the jolt of the wagon, the ache in her shoulder, the rhythm of hooves pounding through her bones. Now she lay on something soft. Not stone, but a cot. A thin blanket pulled up to her chest. Her shoulder throbbed dully. When she tried to sit, a gentle hand pressed her back. Easy, a woman's voice murmured. Stitches don't like heroes. Leora blinked until the canvas ceiling came into focus. Light filtered in through seams, flickering with the movement of people outside. A low fire crackled somewhere to her left, filling the tent with the scent of boiling roots and bitter tea. She looked down. The dress she wore was simple and clean. A loose gray tunic that fell to her knees. Not hers. Her wrists were free. The rope burns were bandaged. In the cots around her, other Omegas shifted and whispered. They say he burned the city of Haldrim to ash. One girl breathed, clutching her blanket. No. No. He ripped the Alpha's heart out with his bare hands. Another said, wide-eyed, held it up so the pack could see it stop beating. The shadows listened to him. A third whispered, my cousin swore she saw them move when he walked past, like they were alive. The Shadow King, Cade Nightborn, monster, legend, savior depending on who was telling the story. To Leora, he was just another man with power and a taste for buying what others threw away. The tent flap rustled. Conversation snapped off like a cut thread. Leora turned her head, expecting another guard, another healer. Instead, Cade stepped inside. He filled the space without raising his voice. 2 guards remained near the entrance, but he moved through the rows of cots alone, hands empty, cloak exchanged for a plain dark shirt and worn leather bracers. His scar looked sharper in the softer light. He stopped beside the nearest girl, the one who'd whispered about Haldrim, and crouched until they were eye level. You're safe here, he said quietly. No one in my camp will touch you without your permission. If you wish to stay with my pack, there will be work and training. If you wish to leave, we'll find you a village that will take you in. No chains, no pits. The girl stared at him, trembling. Slowly, she nodded. He moved from cot to cot, repeating variations of the same promise. No grand speeches, no threats, just calm, steady words that didn't quite fit the monster from the stories. When he reached Leora, he straightened. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. His scent hit her again, pine smoke. Storm rain. That wild edge that made something under her skin sit up and take notice. Her pulse jumped. Traitorous. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading to her fingertips. Leora Ashwind, he said, her name turning softer in his mouth. How is your shoulder? She hated that he knew her name. I'm not one of your rescued strays, she snapped. You paid good gold for this mistake. Remember, congratulations. Your property still breathes. The guards stiffened at her tone. He didn't. One dark brow lifted, just slightly, as if he were more intrigued than offended. I don't own you, he said. His voice dropped. Meant for her alone. And I didn't pay to watch you die. Then why, she demanded. Why pull me out of the pit? I was exactly where my alpha wanted me. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Maybe. Memory. Because your alpha is a coward, he said. And because when I touched you, my mark burned. The answer meant nothing to her. To him, it meant everything. For years. The weight of the prophecy had settled in his bones like winter. A dormant wolf will rise in your dominion, the old seer had told him. Palms branded with signs no healer could remove. She will carry the power to save your line, or burn it to the ground. Your choice will decide which. He'd buried those words under wars and treaties, and a crown that never quite fit. He'd half convinced himself the legend would die on some distant tongue. Forgotten. Then he'd walked into Ashridge. Then a defiant Omega had spit blood into the sand and met death without lowering her eyes. Then her skin had touched his, and the prophecy's mark over his heart had flared like fresh fire, dormant. He thought now. Looking at her, sleeping wolf, waiting for a spark. He straightened. Stepping back, you'll have food, a place to rest, and room to walk, he said. Louder again. But until we reach Nightborn territory, you stay inside the marked circles. My men will escort anyone who wanders. Caged, Leora thought, watching him go. But this cage smelled like pine instead of rot. And the hands that bound her shoulder had been careful. Not cruel. Later, she shuffled to the eating fire with the others. Always shadowed by a guard. The camp buzzed with quiet efficiency, warriors sharpening blades. Scouts returning with reports. Someone laughing by the water barrels. No one spat at the Omegas. No one kicked over their bowls. A steaming wooden dish was pressed into her hands. And stew. Thick with root vegetables and shreds of meat. The first spoonful hit her tongue and nearly undid her. In Ashridge, Omegas ate what was left. If anything was left at all. Here, someone had bothered to season the broth. Careful. The cook grunted when her eyes stung. Too hot. She swallowed hard, blaming the heat for the way her throat burned. Every time Cade passed on the far side of the fire, her body betrayed her. Her heart thudded faster. The hairs on her arms lifted. That strange warmth rolled under her skin. Like an animal pacing just beneath bone. Fear. She told herself. It had to be fear. What else could it be? He kept his distance. She felt his gaze sometimes. A weight between her shoulder blades. But he never came closer than a few paces. If the bond tugged at him, he pulled back harder. Jaw clenched. As if determined not to spook a half-wild creature. That night, the camp settled under a sky strewn with stars. Leora drifted in and out of sleep on her cot in the healer's tent. Dreams flickered blood on sand. Alaric's smile. Cade's eyes burning like coals in the dark. Her skin prickled. Sweat dampened her hairline. The first wave of pain hit without warning. It wasn't the sharp, clear pain of claws or broken bone. It was heat. Sudden and suffocating. Roaring through her veins. Her lungs locked. She clawed at her throat. But there was nothing there. No rope. No hand. Just fire. The world buckled. Her back arched off the cot. A strangled sound tore from her lungs. The tent blurred into streaks of light and shadow. Somewhere. Someone shouted her name. The invisible flames climbed higher, licking at her ribs, her spine, her skull, her body convulsed. Muscles seizing. Teeth grinding hard enough to crack. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. All she could do was burn. The tent flap crashed open. He was there in an instant. The scent of storm and smoke cutting through the reek of fear and herbs. The healer scrambled aside as Cade dropped to his knees beside the cot. One hand hovering, then settling on her shoulder. Her eyes flew open, for a heartbeat. The world narrowed to his face above her. His pupils blown wide. The scar over his eye stark and white. The heat inside her surged, not easing but focusing. As if drawn to him, his wolf surged to the surface, a snarl in his blood and bone. Mate. Fire crawled under Leora's skin, frantic and wild, as if something inside her had finally decided her body was a cage. Her vision smeared into streaks of color. Every breath scraped like glass. The healers tried everything, cool cloths, murmured spells. Bitter draughts pressed to her lips, but the heat only climbed higher, turning her veins into molten metal. She's seizing. Someone gasped. Her pulse. Move. Cade said, the word cut through the panic. Hands fell away. The space around the cot cleared. Leora could barely see him through the haze. But she felt him, his presence heavy and solid. The scent of pine and storm pushing back the choking smell of fear. Her body arched again. A strangled sound tore free. The world narrowed to the beating in her skull. Then his hand found hers, skin on skin. The same contact that had set her bones alight in the carriage yard now sent a different kind of shock through her. The fire didn't vanish, but it shifted, pulling away from her throat, from her chest, pooling instead around the mark over his heart that only he could feel. Air rushed back into her lungs. She sucked in a shuddering breath. Colors sharpened. The roar in her ears dulled to a growl. Good, Cade murmured, voice low and steady at her side. Stay with me. Leora. Breathe. Her fingers tightened around his without her permission. Some traitorous part of her recognized him, leaned toward him, clung to the steadiness of his scent like a lifeline. The healers hovered, whispering, out. Cade said, not looking up. My king, out. Reluctant footsteps retreated. The tent flap fell closed. The quiet that followed was thick, broken only by Leora's ragged breaths and the distant crackle of the fire. She forced her eyes open. He was close enough that she could see the stubble along his jaw, the strain at the corners of his eyes. Sweat dampened the collar of his shirt. His hand dwarfed hers, calloused and warm, but his grip was careful, as if he was holding something breakable. What did you do to me? She rasped. Nothing you didn't already carry, he said. His thumb brushed once over the back of her hand. A grounding touch. This isn't poison. It isn't a curse. It's you. She bared her teeth. I don't need riddles. You're not broken. Leora. His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. There is a wolf inside you, and she's been sleeping for a very long time. Now she's trying to wake up. A bitter laugh scraped her throat. Sleeping. Right. Is that what we're calling it now? The thing that made every alpha wrinkle his nose and walk away. The thing that shoved me into a pit. Yes, he said simply. That thing. She yanked at her hand. But he didn't let go until he felt her fingers stop shaking. Only then did he release her. Slowly. As if it cost him something. I don't need your pity. She spat. Or your stories. I don't believe in Bond fairy tales or chosen ones, or any of it. He sat back, hands resting on his knees, as if anchoring himself. I don't expect you to, he said. Believe whatever you like. It doesn't change what's happening under your skin. He left her with that, slipping out into the night, the echo of his touch still humming in her bones. Later, in a smaller tent lit by a single lantern, he stood over a map, while his inner circle watched him with varying degrees of worry. A dormant wolf. His beta. Joran. Said slowly. You're sure? Cade unbuttoned his shirt enough to show them the mark over his heart, an old seer's sigil that had lain dull for years. Now it glowed faintly, as if lit from within. When I touched her, it burned, he said. Not like a wound, like a warning. The oldest among them, a gray-haired advisor named Mara, exhaled sharply. Born with more power than their body can bear, she recited. So their wolves sleep until something wakes them. A true mate. A battlefield. Death's hand brushing close. Her eyes met Cade's. Most stories end in madness. Or ash. Some don't, Cade said, and I won't force her hand. Not with this, Joran frowned. If she's your fated mate, she is. Cade cut in quietly. My wolf recognizes her. The bond is there. His jaw clenched. But I will not claim her like a prize ripped from a pit. Not after what she's seen. Not while she can barely stand. So you'll say nothing, Mara asked, until she's strong enough to choose. He said. I'll tell her only what she needs to survive. Outside. The night wrapped the camp in cool darkness. Leora couldn't sleep. The fire under her skin had settled into embers, flaring whenever she moved too quickly or thought too hard about the way his hand had fit around hers. She paced the boundary of the healer's circle, counting steps to keep from shaking. Voices drifted from the command tent. She hadn't meant to listen. She told herself she would turn away, that it was none of her business. But her feet carried her closer, until the canvas wall was all that separated her from the murmur of Cade's voice. My fated mate, he was saying, and a dormant wolf besides. If we mishandle this, she could tear the Dominion apart. Blood roared in her ears. The words blurred together, fated mate. Dormant wolf. Prophecy stacking into something too heavy to bear. Her life. Tossed around like a game piece on a board she had never agreed to play on. Is my life just some prophecy to you? The question burned in her throat as she pushed into his tent without waiting to be announced. The advisors fell silent. Cade turned. Surprise, flashing across his face before he wiped it away. Leora, he began. You shouldn't be. Is my life just some prophecy to you? She demanded. Voice shaking. Some story to prove the old seer's right. Did you pull me out of that pit because you saw a person? Or because you smelled a legend? The tent seemed smaller suddenly. The air thicker. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. Feel the tremor in her own hands. Cade looked at her. Really looked. Taking in the fury. The fear. The way she stood like she was waiting for another blow. Both, he said finally. It wasn't the answer she wanted. It was maddeningly honest. He dismissed the others with a nod. They slipped out one by one, the tent flap falling closed behind them. When they were alone, he stepped closer but stopped well out of reach. I bought you because what your alpha was doing was wrong, he said. Because I've seen too many pits and too many crowds cheering while someone else bleeds. I would have taken you if you were ordinary. Her laugh cracked. I've never been ordinary. That's the problem. And, he continued, because when I touched you, my wolf knew you. Because the mark over my heart flared, and every old story I've ever tried to forget woke up at once. She swallowed. Throat tight. So that's it. Fate decided. I'm yours. No. His answer was sharp enough to cut. Fate gave me a thread. What we do with it is on us. He held her gaze. His own unwavering, with or without me. He said, voice low. Your wolf is waking. If you go through this alone, it will kill you. That is the truth. The bond between us might be the only thing strong enough to anchor you through what's coming. He exhaled. But I will not touch you again unless you ask me to. I won't claim you because a prophecy says I should. Silence folded around them. Leora looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. Faintly. As if the tremor came from somewhere far beneath skin and bone. She flexed her fingers. The warmth that had terrified her before now pulsed in time with her heart. A quiet drumbeat that answered something in his scent. In his presence. She wanted to tell him to go to hell. To say she'd rather burn than lean on him. Instead, she stood there, staring at the traitorous tremble of her own fingers, and knew with cold, creeping certainty that whatever was clawing its way awake inside her agreed with him. The changes came small at first. A cup rattled on the table when Leora's temper flared, even though no one had touched it. A quill rolled uphill against the grain of the wood when she clenched her jaw. Shadows in the corners of the tent stretched toward her like curious animals, reaching for the edges of her boots. She told herself it was coincidence. Lack of sleep. A mind fraying under strange skies. Then the howling started. Not outside. The camp was quiet. Guards on patrol. Wolves in their human skins. The sound lived behind her eyes instead. A mournful song that rose whenever she was alone. Sometimes it sounded like one voice. Sometimes like a chorus. Pressing against the inside of her skull. Let me out. It seemed to say. Let me breathe. She pressed her palms to her temples until the echoes faded. One evening, she sat near a smaller cook fire, bowl in hand, listening more than she spoke. Joran, Cade's beta, settled beside her with the easy familiarity of someone who had seen far worse than a snarling Omega. You know why they call him a monster? Joran said, nodding toward the shadow of the command tent, where Cade studied maps late into the night. Because he is one. Leora replied. Too quickly. Joran huffed a quiet laugh. That's one version. He stared into the flames for a moment. Then told her another. Years ago. A border war had nearly swallowed half the Dominion. An ambitious Alpha had been using smaller packs as shields. Throwing their bodies at an enemy, he was too cowardly to face himself. When Cade took the field, he'd seen the game for what it was, so he made a different deal. Joran said. He told the enemy they could have one name his. He'd bear the blame. He'd be the monster. The Shadow King. The butcher in their tails. In exchange, they left the small packs alone. Leora frowned. You expect me to feel sorry for him because he volunteered to be hated? No. Joran said simply. I expect you to know who. Exactly. You're calling a monster. The story sat heavy in her chest, long after the fire died. Later that night, unable to sleep, she found herself outside the command tent. The flap hung open to let in the breeze. Inside, Cade stood with his back to her, unbuckling his armor piece by piece, without the layers of leather and steel. He looked human, broad shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Old scars crisscrossed his back and rib slashes. Punctures. The puckered remnants of something that had nearly taken him apart. She should have turned away. Instead, she stepped inside. He heard her and reached for a weapon by reflex before relaxing. Hand falling back to his side. Can't sleep, he asked. She hesitated. Then shook her head. The howling won't stop. He didn't mock her. Didn't pretend not to understand. That's your wolf, he said. She's closer to the surface now. She stared at the scars marring his chest. What does it feel like? Shifting, he considered his answer. Like breaking and healing at the same time. He said. Like every bone in your body remembers it was once something else. It hurts. And then, it doesn't. Then, it's freedom. The world smells different. Sounds different. You remember what it's like to move without thinking about how. She swallowed. I don't know if I want that. His mouth tilted. Not quite a smile. You might not get to choose. The blood moon is coming. He extended his hand. Palm up between them. Here, he said quietly. You're shaking. She hadn't realized she was. She stared at his hand for a long moment. Then, heart pounding, laid her fingers in his. The bond leapt like a spark, catching dry tinder. Warmth rushed through her. But this time it didn't burn. It spread like hot tea on a winter's night, settling in her chest, slowing her breath instead of stealing it. The howling in her head faded to a low, contented hum. She could have snatched her hand back. She didn't. The healer found them like that the next morning. And later, in the privacy of the healer's tent, she laid out the truth Leora had been walking around for days. The blood moon will pull at every wolf in this camp. The woman said, but for one whose wolf is waking late, it will be a storm. If you go into that night unbound, your power will tear you apart trying to find an anchor. Leora's mouth went dry. And if I let him, mark me, his bite will tie your bodies together. The healer said gently. His power can help hold you when the change hits. It's still dangerous. Some die anyway. But your chances are better with a mate's bond than without. Mate. The word curled around Leora's ribs like another chain. And yet, there was that stubborn warmth again, the one that had eased the fire when nothing else could, alone that night. She stood at the edge of camp and looked out at the dark line of the horizon. Ashridge was a smear of memory in the distance. The pit a ghost she could still feel under her feet. She pictured the crowd cheering for her death. The way no one had spoken up. Not once. Not even when she'd taken a blow meant for someone else. Then she thought of a king who kept offering choices instead of orders. A man who had every excuse to take what he wanted and still drew lines he refused to cross. If I'm going to die, she thought, it will not be for their amusement. Her feet carried her to his war tent before she finished deciding. He looked up when she entered. Eyes shadowed with fatigue and something like dread. As if he'd been waiting for this moment and bracing for the answer. I'll do it, she said. His brows drew together. Leora, if I'm going to die. She cut in, voice steadying. I'd rather it be fighting for something instead of running from it. I'll do the ritual. I'll take the mark. Silence stretched. The maps on the table lay forgotten between them. Once I mark you, he said slowly, there is no going back. You become mine, and I become yours. In the eyes of the bond, in the eyes of every wolf who smells it, she stepped closer. Close enough to see the way his hands had clenched on the table's edge. Then don't die, she whispered. I'm tired of being left. The look that crossed his face then was equal parts promise and fear, as if she'd just handed him both a weapon and his own beating heart. The night the blood moon rose, the world felt like it was holding its breath. It hung low over the Nightborn fortress, swollen and red, staining the stone and the snow with its light. Outside the walls, in a circle of ancient standing stones, candles flickered in shallow bowls, their flames shivering in the cold air. The pack seer stood at the edge of the circle, murmuring words in a language older than the Dominion itself. Leora stood in the center, bare feet on cold earth, a simple white shift brushing her knees. The fabric trembled with every breath she took. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, no matter how tightly she curled them into fists. The howling in her head had become a constant, rising and falling like the tide. Tonight it was louder, pressing against her bones, begging for release. Kate approached from behind, footsteps soft on the packed dirt. She didn't turn to look at him, but she felt him, his presence, settling around her shoulders like a cloak. The familiar clash of pine and storm on the air. The bond between them hummed. A low current under her skin. Ready? He asked quietly. No, she admitted, but do it anyway. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if there hadn't been so much fear in it. He stepped in close, heat radiating from his body. His hands settled lightly on her shoulders, fingers brushing her collarbones as he leaned in. His breath warmed the side of her neck. When this is done, he murmured, a voice meant for her alone. You can walk away from me if you choose it. I'll release you, if that's what you want. But I need you to hear this now. She swallowed, throat dry. Then say it. I vow, he said, each word steady. To protect you, not to cage you. To stand between you and the world when it tries to break you, not between you and yourself. The bond doesn't make you mine to own, Leora. It makes us each other's to carry. The words settled on her skin like another layer of warmth, softening something hard and brittle inside her. She closed her eyes. Bite me before I change my mind. He exhaled once, as if releasing a final doubt. Then he lowered his mouth to the place where her neck met her shoulder. The first press of his teeth was gentle. The bite was not. Pain ripped through her in a white-hot burst. For a heartbeat, it was the pit all over again. Claws and flesh. The taste of blood on her tongue. Then the mark flared, and molten heat surged outward, racing through her veins, branding every inch of her from the inside. Her knees gave. The world tilted. The standing stones blurred, candles smearing into streaks of light. She heard herself scream, raw and animal, as her body twisted under an invisible force. Bones cracked, not the shattering of a break, but the ruthless reshaping of something being forced back into its original form. Her spine arched, lengthened, her fingers curled, then snapped, nails thickening, darkening, skin burned, split, and fur pushed through in a rush of sensation that was pain and relief tangled so tightly she couldn't tell them apart. Through it all, she felt him. Cade dropped to his knees just outside the circle. One hand clamped over his own chest. The mark over his heart seared as if someone had pressed a brand there. Her pain poured through the bond like fire down a shared vein. "Leora," he gasped. The word half-growl. "Stay with me. Don't you dare let go." The seer's chant rose, weaving around the sound of her screams, around the frantic thunder of Cade's heartbeat. The pack knelt, heads bowed, but their scent was a distant haze. The only thing clear was him, his voice, his scent. The desperate promise in every word. "If you go," he choked, eyes locked on the writhing shape in the circle. "I'll follow. You hear me, wherever you fall. I'm coming after you, so don't make me chase you into the dark." Something inside her heard, through the chaos. A thread tugged a line from her heart to his, from the fire in her veins to the burn in his chest. The howling in her mind sharpened. No longer a formless chorus, but a single voice. Fierce and wild. Mine. It roared. Ours. The world snapped. Light exploded from her body. Blinding and pure. Washing over the stones and the kneeling wolves. Casting long, sharp shadows. For a breathless moment, everything was white noise and brightness, and the sensation of falling upward. Then it was over. Silence rolled across the circle, where Leora had knelt in shredded white cloth. A massive wolf stood, sides heaving. Her fur was silver shot through with black along her spine, dark as spilled ink where it pooled around her paws. Her eyes glowed pale gold, but shadows threaded through the irises like storm clouds. The pack bowed their heads. An instinctive response to power that thrummed in the air like a living thing. Cade pushed to his feet, chest still aching, and stepped forward. In the next heartbeat, his own body rippled, bones shifting, skin giving way to fur. A dark giant stood where the king had been, his wolf as black as midnight, eyes a deep, burning amber. He approached her slowly, head low, the wolf equivalent of an outstretched hand. Leora's ears flicked. She lowered her muzzle to his, breath mingling. Nose touched nose. The bond flared. Not as fire this time, but as a steady, anchoring warmth. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. The moment barely had time to settle. Horns split the night, sharp and shrill. They cut through the canyon's quiet, echoing off the fortress walls. The seer stiffened. Guards on the ramparts shouted. The scent of fear, of anger, of approaching wolves rolled in with the wind. Cade's wolf jerked his head up, ears flattening. A scout skidded to a stop at the edge of the circle, chest heaving. "Ashridge," he panted. "Alaric's banner, and others with him. They're marching on the fortress. They say you stole their property." Property. The word slammed into Leora like a physical blow. Shadows curled tighter around her paws, responding to the spike of fury. Her new wolf bristled, lips peeling back from gleaming teeth. Alaric Thorn. For the first time since she'd heard his name, there was no tremor in her bones. No cold hand of dread on her spine. Only a deep, steady growl rolling up from her chest. Her fear had burned away in the circle. What was left was something far more dangerous. The fortress woke like a struck nerve. Bells rang from the towers. Gates slammed shut. Iron teeth biting deep into stone. Armor buckles clinked. Leather straps tightened. Archers hurried up the walls with quivers thudding against their backs. The calm of the ritual circle shattered into motion and shouted orders. Leora shifted back to human in a whirl of pain and light, collapsing to one knee as her bones settled into familiar shapes. The white shift hung in tatters around her, streaked with dirt and blood. Every muscle trembled. Still humming with the memory of her wolf's first run. "You're done for tonight," Cade said, catching her elbow as she tried to stand. "You go to the safe room." "That's not a request." She jerked her arm free. "You mark me. Wake my wolf. And now you want me to hide in a hole while the alpha who threw me in a pit walks up to your gate." His jaw flexed. "You can barely stand. Watch me." She snapped, teeth bared. "If Alaric wants what he thinks is his, he can look me in the eye while I tell him no." For a long heartbeat, they stared each other down, bond crackling between them. Then Cade swore under his breath and nodded once. "Stay with me," he said, "or I swear I'll drag you back myself." They took the wall together. Below, the plain in front of the black gate seethed with bodies. Ashridge banners snapped in the cold wind, flanked by the colors of allied warbands, greedy for a share of whatever spoils Alaric had promised them. At their center, astride a glossy black stallion, Alaric Thorne looked up. Smile as bright and false as ever, "Shadow King," he called, voice amplified by the slope of the land. "You have something that belongs to me. Return the Omega you stole, and we may find peace between our packs yet." Murmurs rolled through his ranks. Leora felt wolves on both sides watching, waiting to see if she would cower or disappear. She stepped up onto the parapet beside Cade, letting every eye find her. The wolf inside her growled, low and pleased. The fear that had once hollowed her out at the sight of Alaric's face simply wasn't there. "You had your chance to see me," she called down, the voice clear as a bell. "At 3 mating circles, in your own pit. You chose not to. I am not yours. Alaric Thorne," her voice sharpened. "I am Leora of Nightborn now." A ripple passed through the gathered armies. Some faces hardened, others softened. Just a fraction, as if they were seeing more than a nameless Omega for the first time. Cade signaled to his scouts. A bundle of parchment sailed from the wall, pages fluttering as they scattered at Alaric's feet. Sealed contracts, lists of names with prices beside them, routes to foreign strongholds written in a scribe's careful hand. "Receipts," Cade said, his tone almost conversational. "For every Omega and orphan you've sold to warlords across the sea. Were you going to mention that part in your negotiations, Alaric, or did you forget?" Roars met his words, not battle cries, but angry, disbelieving shouts from wolves in Alaric's own ranks. Some looked down at the pages, then up at their alpha with something like horror. Alaric's smile cracked. "Lies," he snarled. "Forged by a king who steals what isn't his. Enough talking. You want a monster. Nightborn, you'll have one." He raised his hand. The front lines surged forward. The first wave hit the black gate like a storm. Nightborn archers loosed, arrows streaking into the melee. Stone shuddered under the impact of rams and claws. Cade gave one sharp nod, then vaulted from the wall. He shifted midair. One heartbeat, he was a man dropping into chaos. The next, a massive black wolf hit the ground with enough force to shake the earth. Teeth bared in a snarl that froze the front ranks for a precious moment. Then he was moving, a dark streak through the crush, tearing into attackers with precise, efficient violence. Leora felt every impact through the bond like distant thunder. Her own body answered. She half-shifted without thinking, bones thickening just under the skin, nails lengthening, eyes burning with that pale, threaded gold. Shadows curled around her hands, eager, waiting. When she leapt from the steps to join the fight, it felt less like falling, and more like finally stepping into the shape the world had been trying to force her into all along. She moved like a flicker of darkness. One heartbeat, she stood in front of the gate. The next, she was 10 paces away, shadows pulling her through the gaps in the world. Her hands raked across an attacker's chest. Not quite claws, not quite human, leaving lines of shimmering force that knocked him back. Another swung at her. She slipped into the shadow of his arm and came out behind him, a ghost with fire in her veins. The battlefield was noise and blood and breath. But above it she could always find him, Cade. A constant presence in the bond. A dark star pulling her attention, no matter how far she slipped from his side. The spear came from the blind spot she hadn't learned yet. She saw the glint at the last second. A flash of wicked metal arcing toward her ribs. Her body tensed to move. But she wasn't fast enough this time. Cade was. He slammed into her, shoving her out of the weapon's path. The spear sank deep into his side instead. Pain detonated across the bond. He hit the ground hard, shifting back with a ragged cry. Fingers clawing at the shaft, jutting from his body. Dark veins began to spider out from the wound. The metal slick with a faint, oily sheen. Poison. The world narrowed. Leora's wolf slammed into her from the inside, tearing through whatever restraint she had left. Time slowed, every motion stretching into forever. The shadows around her surged, not just curling but rising, forming shapes, wolves made of smoke and night, their eyes burning like coals. Her heartbeat pounded a single word, mine. She stood over him, and the specter wolves answered her rage, pouring past her in a howling wave. They plunged into Alaric's ranks, knocking warriors aside, snapping incorporeal jaws that left wounds of cold and terror instead of torn flesh. Lines broke. Men dropped weapons, scrambling back from enemies they couldn't touch. Leora walked through the chaos as if moving through a dream. Alaric met her halfway, teeth bared, eyes wild. "This is what you chose," he spat. "To be his weapon, instead of my Omega." "I chose," she said, voice steady as stone, "to stop letting men like you decide whether I live or die." He lunged. She didn't meet him with claws or teeth. She met him with shadow. It erupted from her hands, wrapping around his arms, his legs, his throat. He strained against it, muscles bulging. But the more he fought, the tighter it drew, binding him, dragging him to his knees. She could have crushed his windpipe, could have let the shadows squeeze until he went limp. She didn't. Instead, she turned, hauling him with her, the bindings of darkness forcing his head up to face the watching armies. The spectral wolves ringed them, snarling, keeping both sides at bay. "Alaric Thorn," she shouted, her voice carrying farther than it had any right to. "Sold Omegas and orphans to slaughter for gold. Threw his own people into pits. Called us property." She looked from face to face. Ashridge wolves, allied warbands, Nightborn archers on the walls. "No more," she said. "We are not his. We are not anyone's to sell." Behind her, Cade staggered to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, poison still eating along the veins of his skin. His wolf paced under his skin, snarling at the sight of her so close to danger. Proud and terrified all at once, he stepped forward, voice hoarse but firm. "Alaric Thorn will stand trial," Cade said. "Before a council of alphas and omegas, his victims will speak. The days of pits and chains end here, under this moon, in front of every eye watching. If you follow him after this, you do it knowing exactly what you serve." Murders and contracts lay scattered at their feet. No one could pretend not to see them. The fight bled out of the field, weapons lowered. Some of Alaric's own warriors backed away from him as if from a plague, faces twisted with shame. Others knelt, not to their disgraced alpha, but toward the fortress where a new shape of power stood, wrapped in shadow and silver. The last thing Leora saw clearly was Cade's face as he swayed, the poison finally winning ground. His eyes found hers. Apology and something softer tangled there. His knees buckled. She dropped beside him, catching his head before it struck stone. His skin burned under her palms, veins darkening like ink under parchment. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his, just as he had knelt for her in the circle. "You anchored me through the fire. Let me carry you through this." The bond pulsed wildly between them, a fraying rope over a chasm. She reached for it anyway, drew the poison toward herself the way she'd drawn air into her lungs in the pit, the way she'd drawn light in the circle. Pain shot up her arms, cold and vicious, burning a path to her heart, somewhere far away. Wolves shouted her name. She held on. Days later, the world came back to Leora in pieces. First, the weight of a hand around hers, warm, calloused, stubbornly there. Then the rough weave of blankets against her skin, the faint hum of voices somewhere beyond stone walls. Finally, the ache deep in her bones, a reminder of poison and shadow, and a choice she'd made with her whole, reckless heart. She opened her eyes. Cade was slumped in a chair beside her bed, head pillowed on the mattress, one arm stretched out, fingers still wrapped around hers as if he'd never once let go. Stubble darkened his jaw. Exhaustion carved shadows under his eyes even in sleep. For a long moment, Leora just watched him breathe. Outside that quiet room, the world had shifted. Alaric Thorne no longer wore an alpha's mark. Stripped of power, bound in chains, he waited for a council where Omegas would sit beside alphas for the first time in living memory. Ashridge had chosen a new leader by open vote. Every pack member counted, not just the ones with titles. Across the Dominion, messengers carried news from fortress to den pits were being filled in. Execution laws rewritten. A cross-pack council formed to protect those who'd once been called weak. In taverns and training yards and cramped little kitchens, wolves whispered about a girl who had risen from the sand and told an alpha no. Weeks later, in a sunlit hall that smelled of pine and incense instead of iron, Cade stood before Leora with no crown on his head. Just a simple band of leather around his wrist that matched the one he held out to her. "I don't need another weapon," he said. "I need a partner. Will you stand beside me? Not as a story they tell about power, but as my equal." She told him she would if Omegas had a voice on every council seat, and if the first decree they signed together ordered every pit torn down, stone by stone. He smiled then, slow and real. Done. Later, Leora walked through a courtyard that had once trained only warriors. Now, rescued Omegas, practiced with wooden staffs beside healers learning new sigils, scouts running drills along the walls, laughter threading through their work. A small girl with wide eyes tugged at her sleeve. "Is it true?" she asked, shy and hopeful. "That you used to be wolfless?" Leora knelt so they were level. "I wasn't wolfless," she said. "I was just waiting for a reason to wake up." That night, under a gentler moon, she stood on the balcony with Cade's cloak wrapped around her shoulders. He pressed a kiss to the mark on her neck. The bond between them, a steady, quiet flame. The valley below lay peaceful. No armies, no horns, just the soft glow of hearth fires and the distant sound of someone singing. She stepped up onto the stone, let the change ripple through her, and shifted into her wolf as easily as breathing. Silver-black fur caught the moonlight, shadows racing to keep pace with her paws as she ran along the battlements. Beside her, a dark giant wolf matched her stride, their bond a bright thread tying every step together. "They called me a ruined Omega, a girl born wrong." Her voice rose over the scene, but the truth was simpler. "I wasn't made to kneel in their sand. I was made to run beside a king and rewrite the laws of our world." And as the story fades, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments, what part of Leora's journey stayed with you most? If this tale moved you, please share it with someone who loves fantasy romance. And don't forget to subscribe to Moonfire Tales so you don't miss the next story.